I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My voice broke as I looked at Carol sitting opposite me at the kitchen table, and I felt my insides clench up. She didn't react at all. The nails she kept so nicely tapped a steady beat on the mug she was holding, and her face was so still. It was unsettling. "I put it toward the wedding," she stated, shrugging as if we were talking about something insignificant. "Luke was short on funds, and that money belonged to all of us. You'll get past this." "Belonged to all of us?" I repeated, my voice getting louder. "That was my money, Carol. I spent 2 years as a waitress just to afford college." "You wanted me to put it somewhere safe for you," she replied, her voice having a sharp edge now, "and that's exactly what I did. I used it for something meaningful." "Your brother's wedding," I exclaimed. "Her son, he's not related to me." Luke didn't even bother to act like he was concerned about the mess he'd created. As far as he was concerned, his perfect wedding, with its over-the-top location and flower decorations that probably cost more than my schooling, was way more important than anything I might have been planning for myself. I was furious, but before I could say anything, my father came into the kitchen carrying a cup of coffee. "What's with all the shouting?" he inquired, looking back and forth between us. "Ask Carol," I shot back. "She took the money I saved for college and used it for Luke's wedding." My mom died when I was 10, and by the time my father got remarried, I just wanted things to feel normal again. My name is Emma Williams, and I'm 19 years old. For as long as I can remember, my stepmother Carol has basically run the house. It was pretty obvious from the start that Carol's main focus was always on her own kid, Luke, and herself. I ended up becoming an insignificant consideration, like someone you acknowledge during dinner, but not important enough to actually care about. As soon as I turned 16 and landed my first job, I started putting money aside right away. I put every single tip and every single extra shift into my future college money. I was hoping to attend a college nearby and study to become a nurse, a goal my mom and I had talked about for years. Carol was always going on and on about being smart with money, so when she told me I should let her invest my savings so it could increase, I took her word for it. I really felt like I could put my faith in her. I should have known better. "I just don't get it," my dad remarked, scratching his head as Carol walked right past him, obviously through with the discussion. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" "I didn't have a clue until just now," I responded, my voice shaking. "She told me she'd put the money into investments for me, but she used every last cent on Luke's wedding." He looked unhappy, but I could see the struggle in his expression. He really didn't like arguing, and Carol was well aware of that. "I'm certain there must have been some kind of mistake," he mumbled without conviction. "I'll go talk to her and clear it up." "A mistake?" I exclaimed, my voice getting louder. "She told me herself, Dad." "She honestly doesn't even believe that she did anything wrong." My father was completely speechless. He mumbled something about having to get to work and then disappeared upstairs, leaving me by myself in the kitchen feeling completely devastated by my stepmother's deceit. She had robbed me of what was to come, and my dad just didn't have the backbone to confront her. As I was lying in bed that night, gazing up at the ceiling, my fury morphed into determination. I wasn't about to let her win. That cash rightfully belonged to me, and since my father wasn't willing to stand up for me, I would have to defend myself. The following morning, I rang up a lawyer in town. I had spotted his name on a leaflet at the library. I explained the entire situation, then told him I needed to know if there were any actions I could take. "Those funds represent my life savings. I had earned every bit of it. Can I recover it?" He responded with a collected and businesslike tone. "It's a possibility. If you're able to demonstrate the money was yours and that she spent it without getting your permission, you'll likely have a valid legal claim." He cautioned, "It's not going to be simple, though. Are you prepared to actually go to court?" I paused, uncertain. Suing my stepmother felt extreme, but what other options did I have? Carol had no intention of acknowledging any wrongdoing, and my father obviously had no plans of getting involved. "Yes," I stated with conviction. "I'm ready." My father was aghast when I informed him about the impending legal action. He questioned while walking back and forth across the living room, "Emma, are you sure you want to do this? It's only going to make the situation more stressful." "She's already created a stressful situation," I replied sharply. "Dad, she took what was mine. This has nothing to do with family. It has to do with fairness." His shoulders dropped, and I thought for a moment he might actually support me. But just then, Carol came into the room wearing an annoyed expression. "So, what's your brilliant scheme, Emma?" she asked with a sneer. "Are you actually prepared to drag your entire family's name through the dirt over what amounts to pocket change? Very impressive, I must say." "This isn't just a matter of a few grand," I responded, though my voice trembled slightly. It remained firm. "I'm talking about my entire future here, and I'm not letting you steal it from me." A smirk played across her lips. "If that's what you gotta do, go for it, honey. You're going to lose." It was at that specific moment that I realized there was no going back. Carol seemed to think she could scare me into giving up, but she had no idea just how determined I was. I enlisted the lawyer's help, officially filed the lawsuit, and started pulling together any evidence I could find, including bank records, payroll information, basically anything that would back up my claim that the money was rightfully mine. It had grown into something bigger than just the $8,000. It became about advocating for myself, about refusing to let someone else decide my value. Carol had taken so much more than my savings. She'd stolen my faith in her, and I was set on regaining that. When I decided to take legal action against Carol, it felt like I was stepping into the unknown. I realized I was not only fighting my stepmother, I was also challenging the already shaky dynamic of my family. My father started avoiding me even more, practically living in his workshop anytime I was around. Carol, conversely, went out of her way to provoke me. She would post little digs on the refrigerator like, "Perhaps try saving again, maybe the third time will be successful," or make sarcastic remarks whenever we happened to bump into each other. But despite her best efforts to get under my skin, I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. The trial was scheduled for 3 months hence, which gave me a little bit of time to get everything ready. My attorney, Mr. Peterson, was a calm guy in his late 40s who mostly dealt with minor legal battles. "We're going to need more evidence than just your statement," he told me during one of our appointments. "The important thing is to demonstrate that you own the funds and that Carol used them without your permission. Do you have any proof of your savings or some kind of written confirmation regarding the investment?" "I have my bank statements showing money going in from my job," I mentioned, retrieving a folder from my purse. Also, I scribbled a note to her when I gave her the funds, requesting she invest it. "While it's not an official contract, it's still something," he agreed while quickly reviewing the papers. "It's a decent beginning." "I'm going to issue a subpoena for her bank records. If she used the funds for the marriage ceremony, it ought to be visible on her transactions." Those weeks preceding the actual court date were stressful. My dad barely talked to me, and if he did, it was always to challenge my choice. "Emma," he remarked one night, awkwardly standing right inside my bedroom entrance, "are you certain that you wish to pursue this? Carol is incredibly mad, and you understand how she acts when she's mad." "She's mad because she was discovered," I retorted, not glancing up from my computer. "And yes, Dad, I am moving forward with this. She stole from me." He sighed deeply, rubbing his receding hairline. I really don't want this to destroy the family." I finally looked at him then, and my anger began to rise. "She basically destroyed everything when she made up her mind I was irrelevant, Dad. This is not on me, it's entirely her doing." He had no response to that, and he just walked out without saying anything else. My friends were a comfort to me, even with all the stress happening back at the house. They really supported me, helping me to keep my head in the game whenever I started to feel uncertain. "What you're doing is the correct thing," Lily, my best friend, mentioned during one of our late-night coffee outings. "She shouldn't have taken your funds, and she should be held responsible for her actions. But what happens if I'm defeated?" I inquired, putting into words the anxiety that had been eating away at me from the start. "Suppose the court sides with her? You're not going to lose," Lily stated confidently. "You've put in so much effort for this, and even if things don't pan out how you want them to, you are sticking up for yourself. That's what is significant." Her comments provided me with courage on the days when I was really struggling under the pressure. The legal action had gone beyond simply being about the $8,000 at this point. It had become a matter of getting my voice back and demonstrating that I wouldn't be ignored or suppressed. As we got closer to the day we had to go to court, my attorney came across a surprising piece of information. Scattered among the financial documents he had requested, there were some strange things happening with Carol's spending habits. Substantial sums of money had been taken out of a shared bank account that she had with my dad, but the funds hadn't only been used for Luke's wedding expenses. It seemed that Carol had been secretly moving money into an individual account of hers for quite some time, spending it on fancy things and vacations that my father had no knowledge of. This conversation with Mr. Peterson, just before we went to trial, really threw me for a loop. He told me that the stakes had been raised considerably. According to him, this situation was about more than just my money now. Introducing this information, he suggested, could reveal a much larger issue of fiscal recklessness. That news really knocked me off my feet. I was always aware that Carol put her own needs first, but this was truly shocking. I found myself questioning whether or not I should even use this evidence during the trial. While it would make my argument stronger, there was a part of me that knew it would probably crush my father. I told Lily the night before the hearing that I wasn't sure I had it in me to do that to him. "I know it will shatter his world." Lily responded softly that my father was owed the truth. She felt he'd been living under her control for far too long. Perhaps this is the thing that will finally open his eyes. The day the trial started, I felt like I was carrying an immense burden as I sat in the courtroom. Carol was sitting across from me, with her lawyer whispering to her. She appeared as poised and collected as always. Her impeccably done hair and pricey jewelry made her seem invincible. Next to her sat my father, looking both confused and uncomfortable. He didn't so much as glance in my direction. As the judge came in and the trial got underway, I made myself concentrate on the documented information. My legal counsel showed my bank records, the message I'd given to Carol, and documents showing all of her lavish purchases. Mr. Peterson said to the court that the evidence was plain to see. The defendant dipped into my client's savings without asking, placing her own desires ahead of what was right for her stepdaughter. Carol's attorney attempted to claim the funds were willingly handed over, but the courtroom went quiet when Mr. Peterson unveiled the bank statements we had subpoenaed. Every detail was exposed, including the withdrawals from my father's accounts and all those extravagant things she bought. As the evidence was read out loud, I stole a peek at my father. His face seemed to lose all its color, and he sat back in his seat, eyes wide, clearly not believing what he was hearing. It was the first time I'd seen Carol look genuinely disturbed. When I got the chance to talk, I looked right at the judge. That money was meant to secure my future, I explained, keeping my voice firm, even though I had a knot in my throat. I had faith that Carol would help me make it grow, but she just took it for herself instead. "It's not just about the $8,000, it's about what's right and wrong. I have the right to fair treatment, and I need my voice to be acknowledged." With a renewed sense of resolve, I took my seat. Whatever the verdict may be, I was confident that I had done all I could to advocate for myself. The courtroom was thick with anticipation as the judge leaned in, carefully examining the evidence my lawyer had submitted. The magnitude of what had just come to light, Carol's years of quietly draining money from my father's accounts, seemed to fill the room. In a shift from her usual confident demeanor, Carol finally seemed uneasy. My father, however, appeared utterly devastated. The judge, Mrs. Williams, spoke with unwavering conviction, stating that the provided evidence undoubtedly showed I'd used Ms. Williams' funds without getting her permission, regardless of what I'd asserted. Even more troubling was the continuing pattern of mishandling funds that was shown by taking money out of our family's shared accounts. Carol's attorney tried to reply quickly, providing flimsy arguments about how our family worked and who was responsible for what. However, the judge wasn't convinced. She lifted up the banking statements as if to highlight the irrefutable truth of the matter. This goes beyond simply not talking enough or a simple mix-up. It's a betrayal of confidence. I looked over at my dad. He was sitting upright and tense, staring forward, and his complexion was ashen. I could see the impact of the deception becoming clear, and each fresh discovery hurt even more than the ones before it. When it was Carol's time to talk, she attempted to compose herself. "Your Honor," she started, carefully controlling her tone. "This has been made into a much bigger deal than it really is. I only touched Emma's money because I felt it would be good for all of us. My son's wedding was a big deal, and," the judge interrupted sternly, "you spent $8,000 on your son's wedding, while at the same time claiming it was an investment for Ms. Williams. Furthermore, other data demonstrates that you've been taking out significant amounts of money for your own purposes that had nothing to do with supporting the family. Do you actually think there's any justification for what you've done?" Carol hesitated, and the carefully crafted image she was projecting started to fall apart for the first time. I didn't plan for things to. The judge interrupted, putting an end to what she was saying. That's enough. This situation is about more than simply financial compensation. What matters, Mrs. Williams, is being held responsible. And what you've done clearly demonstrates that you are selfish and have no respect for people's faith in you. As the judge got ready to announce her decision, my heart was racing. I didn't allow myself to expect such a solid victory, but suddenly it seemed like it could happen. When she finally spoke, her words felt like a huge burden being removed from me. Based on everything presented here, I am siding with Ms. Williams, the judge stated. Mrs. Williams must pay back the $8,000 along with interest within the next 2 months. Moreover, I am suggesting a thorough examination of the defendant's financial activities to make sure there are no other problems. The courtroom went silent. Carol's face became stern, and her lips tightened into a line. My father put his head in his hands, almost as if he had finally realized the depths of his wife's treachery. I let out a breath, feeling a wave of relief. The money itself wasn't the only thing that mattered. The real victory was being recognized for everything I'd gone through, the confirmation that I wasn't just an overdramatic, foolish kid. I had been treated unfairly, and now everyone was aware of it. As we exited the courtroom, Carol glared at me, saying in a quiet, spiteful tone, "You're going to be sorry for this, Emma," but I didn't react. For what felt like the first time in a long time, I felt like I was the stronger person. "Actually, Carol," I responded, looking directly into her eyes, "you're the one who's going to be sorry for thinking you could get away with this." Dad managed to catch up to me as I walked down the hall. His face was etched with tiredness and a certain remorse. He started to speak. "Emma," his voice unsteady. I was in the dark about it all. "I had no clue she was doing that. You didn't want to know." I cut him off, my voice firm, though not mean-spirited. "You purposefully avoided seeing it because facing the truth was just too hard. But this is the eventual result when you choose to overlook what's really going on." His head dipped in a slow nod and his shoulders seemed to cave in. "You're absolutely correct. I really let you down. And I regret that greatly." It wasn't quite the full-fledged apology I had always imagined receiving, but at least it was a beginning. I realized, perhaps for the first time, that my father wasn't just some inactive person who had failed me, but a man struggling to come to terms with the ramifications of the decisions he'd made. It didn't make things okay, but it did offer a kind of resolution I wasn't prepared for. When I left the courthouse, the sun was shining brightly. The ordeal of the trial was, at last, behind me. The struggle had been long and quite agonizing, but I had stood up for what I believed in and succeeded. Carol's behavior was laid bare for everyone to see, and my father's unwavering allegiance to her had been disrupted. I looked at my phone and saw a text from Lily pop up on the screen. "You actually did it, my treat for drinks tonight?" I smiled as I typed back, "Definitely." The legal battle wasn't simply about the funds. It was about getting back my control and showing myself that I had enough inner strength to demand what was rightfully mine. And now that I'd won the case, I could begin moving on with my life. The days that followed the trial felt almost dreamlike. Even though Carol resentfully complied with the court's decision, which indicated to me that she wasn't done with the situation, the $8,000 was officially back in my possession. After she got back to the house, she was incredibly cold and quiet, deliberately keeping her distance from both my dad and myself. It was weird seeing her acting so meek. It was like her usual bossiness had transformed into a slow burn of anger. But for the first time in a long time, the power was out of her hands, and I found that completely satisfying. On the flip side, my dad just appeared completely bewildered by everything. One night, I found him sitting in the living room, gazing absently at a stack of Carol's financial documents that had been revealed during the proceedings. "She wasn't truthful with me," he said quietly, almost muttering it to himself. I didn't catch on to it after all this time. I took a seat across from him, uncertain of what I should say in that moment. "You had faith in her?" I finally asked. "That's not exactly a bad thing, Dad. But overlooking what she was up to, that's what stings." He then raised his gaze to meet mine, his eyes filled with sorrow and disappointment. "I ought to have defended you," he confessed. "I should have paid closer attention to what was happening. I had the urge, for a brief moment, to unleash my frustration and spell out just how much his lack of action had cost me, but I simply nodded in response. "You still have the chance to," I stated, "by making sure we don't repeat this situation." After a week, Carol packed up and left, taking her smug sense of superiority with her. She left a short message on the kitchen counter, stating simply, "I'll be in touch when I'm ready for the rest of my things." Dad didn't discuss her leaving much, though I noticed a new sense of peace in the house that was actually kind of nice. It was the first time in what felt like forever that I wasn't constantly worried about causing a problem just by existing in my own house. As expected, Luke didn't say anything about it. I never got an apology out of him, whether it was because he didn't know how to deal with what his mom had done or because he just didn't care. A part of me craved some kind of finality, but another part understood that it wasn't necessary. I had fought my fight and come out on top. That was all I needed. I dove headfirst into getting ready for college, finally able to imagine a future for myself again. That $8,000 wasn't just money, it was solid evidence that I was calling the shots when it came to my life. I began looking into different programs, comparing how much they cost, and figuring out the best way to get the most out of every single dollar. I felt a sense of excitement and hope that I hadn't felt in ages. My father asked if he could help me out. "I can't undo any of what happened," he told me one night while I was working on an application, "but I want to help you out in any way I can." I paused, wondering if I should believe his offer after everything that had gone down, but then I saw the genuine remorse in his eyes. He was making an effort, and that meant something. "Thank you, Dad," I said, a little surprised by how heartfelt it sounded. During the quiet moments, I pondered what I had learned from the trial. It wasn't just about Carol or my dad, but about who I was as a person. I had always been the quiet one, the one who hated confrontation and always tried to smooth things over. But taking a stand against Carol showed me I was much tougher than I ever realized. I wasn't simply the nighttime waitress or the overlooked stepchild. I was a person capable of claiming what was rightfully mine and defending my prospects. And that future was only just dawning. A few months onward, I found myself outside my dorm, gazing upward at the scarlet brick facade that would be the backdrop of the next phase in my life. It seemed so strange to actually be present, prepared to embark on my college journey after all my past experiences. My father had really wanted to assist me in moving my belongings, which I allowed, even though he spent the majority of his time expressing regret for not properly transporting my boxes. His anxiousness, which usually bothered me, didn't get on my nerves this time, for what felt like the first time in a very long while. It felt authentic. "Are you positive you don't require any further assistance?" he inquired for what felt like the fifth time, lingering by the door while I unpacked my things. "I'm fine, Dad," I replied, smiling. "Thank you for everything." He paused for a moment and then nodded in agreement. "I'm proud of you, Emma. You've dedicated so much effort to this." Hearing those words created a sensation of constriction within my chest. Although they didn't completely wipe away the things that had happened before, they signaled to me that he was making an effort. And that really mattered to me. Once I began adjusting to my new daily life, I understood how profoundly everything had transformed. College turned out to be everything I hoped it would be. Difficult, exhilarating, and brimming with potential. Each lecture, each interaction with a professor or classmate seemed like it moved me closer to the life I had been struggling to achieve. I always felt a wave of satisfaction whenever I cracked open one of the textbooks that I had purchased myself. This was something I'd achieved, and it was mine forever. Back at our house, things were more peaceful than they used to be. With Carol gone permanently, my dad was gradually figuring out how to get by without her being around. We didn't have the strongest connection, definitely not as strong as I would have wanted, but we were in the process of creating something new between us. He would ring me every Sunday just to see how I was doing, and I valued his commitment more than I ever imagined possible. What about Carol and Luke? They slowly disappeared from my everyday life. Their presence became less and less significant as time wore on. I also made sure not to spend any time hopping for an apology that I knew would never materialize. I had already received what truly mattered to me. My freedom, my identity, and where I was headed in life. One weekend, Lily came over to hang out, and we chilled on a bench close to campus while drinking expensive coffee and laughing about how ridiculous dorm life could be. "Emma, you're absolutely crushing it," she told me, playfully nudging me with her shoulder. "Even after all the craziness that went down, you're still here. And not just here, but you're really doing well." Her words stayed with me for a long time. I had spent such a significant period of my life being shaped by the opinions of other people, everything from Carol's negative opinions to my father's failure to act, and even Luke's lack of care. But now, for maybe the first time ever, I wasn't allowing their actions to control my life. I was finally creating the life I wanted for myself. It was an amazing feeling, honestly. Walking back to my room that night with activity all around on campus, I reflected on the girl I used to be just a year prior, someone timid, unsure, and too scared to speak her mind. That version of me, though, was no longer present. Now I felt like a more resilient person, self-assured and willing to face future challenges. I saw this as more than just the end of a story. Instead, I felt like it was a fresh start. I realized that I had control over my own life and at long last felt prepared to truly experience it.